Hello. We have Eddie from Osasco. Hello, Eddie. Can you tell us where you are? I am Alberto Costa. I am speaking from São Paulo, capital.
And I'm Pablo Toledo, and I'm speaking from Buenos Aires in Argentina, so a long way away.
Exactly. We have someone from Portugal, Pablo. They are in Portugal watching us. Welcome, Marcelo.
Oh, that's even further. So yes. Marcelo wins.
Yeah. Someone from Lorena in São Paulo. Hello. Hello, Tiago. Vanessa from São Paulo as well. Okay, some more coming. Edna. Hello, Edna. Hello, Neuza. Where are you? Can you please tell us? All right, it's about time we start. So I am Alberto Costa from Cambridge. I am here as a host this time, and I'm here to welcome my colleague Pablo Toledo. So before anything, thank you very much for attending this webinar this afternoon. And thank you very much, Disal, once again for opening this space to us. We are really grateful for this opportunity. And it's a pleasure to be talking to teachers across Brazil or maybe elsewhere. We see Portugal, for example, and a couple of other places. Today we have a special guest, Pablo Toledo from Buenos Aires. Pablo works for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. He is a Senior Assessment Services Manager for the Southern Cone and Andes. So he is responsible for many countries in Latin America. Pablo is an English teacher and teacher trainer with a postgraduate advanced certificate in educational assessment from the University of Cambridge. And he also has a diploma in education policy from Universidade Torquato de Teja. Before joining Cambridge, Pablo managed projects in the areas of remote teaching, internationalization of higher education, and language teaching to refugees from the British Council, and he also led the education department of the Buenos Aires Herald newspaper. Pablo is the president of La Alta, Latin America Association of Language Testing and Assessment. Well, with such an outstanding bio, Pablo, welcome to Brazil once again, and have a good one.
Thank you very much, Alberto. You forgot to mention the most important part of my bio, which is that I am a friend of Alberto Costa. And
yes,
that is one of my proudest achievements.
A great friend, yes, by all means.
And thank you for welcoming me back in Brazil. I hope some of you had the chance of joining us and the Cambridge team for one of our Cambridge days back in July, when I had the great fortune of the amazing luck of being invited and to be sharing there. There are people here from Curitiba. That is one of the places that we visited. I was definitely in Sao Paulo too. So if anybody was in one of those sessions, please leave a shout out in the chat. So today we're going to be talking about something different, because it's the end of the year. Because if we talk about things like exam preparation and how to teach and all that, you're probably thinking, well, but it's November, so I want to leave all of these things behind. But because we are at this time of year, it is a great time to stop and think, to stop and reflect, and to stop and plan ahead. I know that we are all still rushing to make it to December, and that it feels like it's still a long way until we wrap up the academic year. But this is a good time to talk about things which might be a little bit different. And today, I want to invite you to reflect on some things that we traditionally don't think about when we think about English? Um, because English, for many people, we are in. I mean, if I think back of what things were like when I was beginning to study English many years ago, a number of years ago, or when my parents' generation thought about studying English, English was something you had to want to do. The way that today, if I want to study German, or if I want to study Russian, if I want to study Urdu, if I want to study any language that is not English, somehow we expect people to have a good reason to do that, to have a really strong why. Like, I want to study this language because it's the language of my ancestors, or because I feel close to that culture, or because I go to a school that is connected with that. But there is some kind of connection with the language. And that reflects in many of the things that people who study these languages do, and in the way those languages are taught. I always admire the way institutions like the Alliance Française or the Istituto Italiano di Cultura or the Goethe Institute, if you look at their advanced courses, or even the Confucius Institute for Chinese or any language, if you look at the advanced courses that they offer, there is always a cultural element, or there is always an element that goes beyond the language. English, we have a very strong advantage. We have a very, very strong plus, which is that English is the default language. English is mandatory. You have to study English. For most people these days, and I know that is the case for most people in Brazil, if not all, when you go to school, there is some English learning involved. It's part of the things you have to study. And it is an expectation that you learn English because it's a useful language, it's the language of the world. There are a number of reasons to do it. But it became this, so that is fantastic for us English teachers, because it means that we will always have a job. It means that we will always have people interested in learning the language that we teach in, so we will always have something to do. But also, what about all those other motivations? English is the language of communications, of work, of academics, of academic life, of a number of things. But can it be more than that? This is why today I want to invite you to reopen a question that for English we kind of take for granted, because English is this default language. And that is a question of why. That is a question of why do we learn English? What does it mean to people who learn it? So to open that, I would like to open with a couple of questions for you. So in the chat box, and please type the first thing that comes to mind. When I mention these languages, which is the first word that comes to mind, or the first idea that you associate with each of these languages? Let's begin with French. Things that come to mind when I say French, or when you think about French. Croissant, says Marcelo. It's amazing because when I do this session, usually croissant is the first thing that comes. Cheese or fromage. Then absolutely. Fancy. Eddie, that's amazing. I mean, yes, somehow French is connected with this idea of chic, this idea of charme, this thing of the fancy, elaborate thing. It's like you cannot be rude in French. French is the language of love. French is the language of politeness, like Tiago says. Coffee, yes, absolutely. But come on, we're in Brazil. So, abajur, fromage, absolutely. The perfume. Paris, chic. Cuisine, l'amour, absolutely, Arthur. So what about, let's change our lenses. What about German? I don't think croissant is going to be on the list. Sausage. So not croissant, but sausage. Marcelo, are you hungry by any chance? Yes, absolutely, Tiago. Negative associations that come from history, things connected with World War II, are very difficult to disassociate from, especially the case of German. October, then fiance, says Kelly. Okay, I'm sure there's an interesting story behind that. Berlin, beer. Yes, it's not the coffee it's not like coffee in France or croissants in France, but it's part of that. Strudel, what about attitudes? What about behaviors or characteristics that you associate with German? We have things like polite and chic with French. Do you have similar associations when I say German? There is objectivity, says Marcelo. There is this thing about, yes, things that we connect German with precise, strict, even the language, dogmatic, says Alberto, absolutely cold. Okay, what about Chinese? What comes to mind when I say Chinese? Noodles, absolutely. We are still on a food theme, Marcelo. I strongly suggest you have my permission to stand up from your computer. Just go grab a bite to eat. You deserve it. Sushi, hospitality, straight hair, definitely. Tradition, this idea of the millennial culture, disciplined for disciplined with Chinese, absolutely. So look at how there are things that we associate which are elements of culture, things like dragons or Chinese New Year celebrations, foods, but also many associations which have to do with colors like red, but also concepts, wisdom, discipline, tradition, or rigor with German, or elegance and politeness with French. I am super sure that you can be disciplined in French. I am pretty sure that you can be strict and rigorous in French. And I am sure that when French people are romantic, that when German people are romantic, they can be really romantic, that you can express love in German. But it is not something that we associate with their language, that we associate with the people that speak that language. And finally, what about English? Pint, yes, back to beer. Interestingly, there were references to beer with German. Germans eat beer by the liter, not by the pint. So just a little note. Uh, but then other words that are coming in are super interesting. Words like connection, world, words like global. Uh, and then we have things like fast food, punctuality, royalty, so something British there. Um, punctuality, slang, punctuality again, fish and chips, going back to England being the home of English, monarchy, tea, liberty. Liberty with more of a US association, which is interesting because part of the thing with English punk rock, says Ed now, absolutely. Also, it's interesting how ideas of ownership of language come in because there are people here looking at the US as owners of English. There are people here looking at England as owners of English in the associations that you put, the difference between liberty and monarchy. Liberty as the statue of, and monarchy as in King Charles, Queen Elizabeth. But also, when no one mentions Bob Marley, nobody mentions Crocodile Dundee or kangaroos, which is something that we associate with Australia, which is an English-speaking country, or India, which is one of the languages that is spoken, and the language that is universally spoken across India is English. So, but when we said French, there were no associations with Algeria or with French-speaking Africa, or even with your neighbors in the French Guianas, your neighbors in the parts of France which are actually in the Americas, in South America, in Central America, in the Caribbean. So global language, says Arthur, and that is true. English is different from others in that it has become mostly detached from this idea of a people, a culture, a place, and it has become global. It's become a number of things. So it's got a bit of a different status. So, and I would like you to complete this dialogue again with the first thing that comes to mind, which is why English? Because somebody asks you this about yourself, about your students. Why English? Because first thing that comes to mind. It's an international language, says Ghislaine, sorry, because it's the most influential language in the world, says Marcelo, and that is correct, because it's global, because of movies. Absolutely. It saved my life, literally, Tiago. I would like to hear that story. It is beautiful and useful. Neusa, thank you so much for bringing that back, the idea that a language can be beautiful and that English can be beautiful, not just useful, but the two things. Because I love it, says Daniele, and that is a really powerful reason. Because it connects us with all the other languages, 100%, Eddie. Because of technology, yes. And also because I love it, says Arthur, because it's a colonizer's language, says Edna, and that is 100% correct. Although it's not the only colonizer's language. Actually, I mentioned German, I mentioned Chinese, I mentioned French, three imperial languages. Ask, uh, so, because it is spoken all over the world, says Kelly, and that is correct. So, today, I would like to invite you to think back of a question of to think back of this question, to come back to the question of why. And I will begin by why are we here today? So we are here, first of all, to make a few new friends. So I promise that here I'm showing you some faces, and these are some new friends. Maybe you've already seen one of these faces. Maybe you have already met one of these people, perhaps even in the flesh. If And these are some people that I will be referring to, whose ideas I will be coming back to again and again today. So I consider them my intellectual friends, or people that sort of gave me lots of ideas for this session. I hope that in the next 45 minutes, they become your friends too. We are also here, and the first of these friends that I would like to introduce you to is this guy who's called Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek actually does not come from the field of education. He's more of one of these management consultant people. He's got a and he has a really influential talk, a really influential TED talk that sort of kick-started his career, on the idea that he calls the golden circle. And he's talking mostly about companies. He's talking mostly about products and the world of business. And he says that there are three sort of questions that you can ask about what a company does. So the first question is the question of what. What is it that we do? And to some degree, and one hopes, everybody knows what they do. So we are Apple, we make computers and watches, and so this is what we do. We do iPhones, and we do iPads, and we do this computer, and we do that, and we do this. So to some degree, everybody knows what they do. And when we want to tell people about our company or our products, or in our case about English, we tend to start with what? What is it? There is a second question, which is how something is done. And some organizations, or some people know how they do what they do. So how do we speak English? How do we use English in our lives? Some people know how they do that. But there is another question, there is a third question, which Simon Sinek says is the most important one of the three, which is the question of why. And he says, and I'm glad that Marcelo brought that up in the chat. He says that when we talk about a company's products, when we talk about something that we do, when we want to describe something, we should start with why. And why is actually two things. What is my reason? What is the reason I do what I do? And there is another meaning of why, which is what is my purpose? What am I doing this for? So what am I trying to gain? When we talk about English and we talk about why English, many of our answers tend to be questions of what for. So to study, to work, it's international, it's global, to connect. And we tend to put these things first. What Simon Sinek says is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That there is something about this drive, about this reason, about this sense of mission and purpose that actually gets people to connect, even with products. And I mentioned Apple, and Apple is a good example. Yes, they do cool products that are super expensive and do things well and blah, blah, blah. But there is a philosophy, there is something about the way, about the reason they do things, about the ideas behind it, about the thinking that comes from it, that kind of transcends. And when you are an Apple user, you are more than people who appreciate that it's a well-made smartphone. You are somebody who buys into into the reason they do things and the purpose that they have. So why English? And I'm going so what are we actually going to talk about next? I'm going to start by talking about the first thing that comes to mind to us teachers when we think about the question why, and that is the issue of motivation. Then I'm going to move on to another concept, which is a concept that has become today, that has become like an extension of that, which is the idea of engagement. And I'm going to go through that in a couple of minutes. Then we are going to look at things that are connected to the question of why English that go beyond engagement. And finally, I'm going to come back to this idea of the other languages. And we're going to have a look at how other languages do it and what we can learn from them. Sounds interesting? If not, this is a great time, Marcelo, to go and have that bite. Let's move ahead. So let's begin with the idea of motivation. So the concept of motivation is for motivation, I'm going to introduce you to the second people on my list of new friends for today, and that is Zoltan Dernier. Zoltan Dernier was born in Hungary, and he moved then to the UK at some point. He wrote about many fascinating things. He's one of the writers about language teaching, that he's one of these people that every single thing that I've read from him has led me in a new direction. He wrote about the psychology of second language assessment. He talked about research methodology, and he was very influential in the development of ideas around motivation. And then the way he defined it is that motivation is responsible for why people decide to do something, how long they are willing to sustain the activity, and how hard they are going to pursue it. And motivation in second language learning is really important because second language learning is something that takes effort, something that takes time. It takes years to learn a language or to acquire new competencies in another language to any meaningful extent. Even if we think of, okay, some languages are similar. So I speak Spanish. If I wanted to get some basic if I wanted to have like a really basic level conversation in Portuguese, it wouldn't take me a lot of time, maybe, or we think it wouldn't, and then it does. For you Portuguese speakers, trying to have some basic communication in Spanish or Portuñol, then maybe we think, okay, it will not take me 5 years, but to actually be proficient, for me to be able to speak to you the way I'm speaking to you now, to talk about these topics in Portuguese, would actually take me time. And I know that the English that I've learned has taken me, well, I've been learning English for something like 40 years now, and I still consider myself a learner. So what has kept me going has been motivation. Without sufficient motivation, even individuals with the most remarkable abilities cannot accomplish long-term goals. When we think about children, we think about the idea of talent, of gift, the idea that certain people have a gift for something. But I'm going to put this to you. I am absolutely sure that there are many people born in the planet, that there are probably a couple thousand people on the planet, living on the planet right now, who are in theory have the gifts, the physical gifts, and the capabilities to play football better than Lionel Messi or better than Neymar. That they were born, that they exist, that they are alive. But what happens if these people never see a football, never see a ball? They are born in a country where football is not popular. So they are quick, they have the foot coordination, they have all of the gifts, or they have all of the abilities that we associate with people who might be good at football or who can go on to become. So they are talented, they have the talent, but they don't have the motivation to study it, to practice, to stick with it. Maybe they begin playing football and they have a certain facility, but they find that there are things in life that attract them more, that practicing football for so many hours with so much dedication, or that getting injured on the football pitch or playing games and devoting your life to that, there are other things in life that are more interesting to do, and they drop it. So does it matter that they were more talented than Neymar or even Pelé? Does it matter that they could have been the next Pelé? Well, they didn't have the motivation, they didn't have the opportunity. So we think of talent. Talent can get you started a bit, but the thing that gets you going, and there are people who have an aptitude, sorry, to learn languages, people who have good memories, people who have certain things, but without the motivation to go on and make the effort to learn a language, it's not going to happen for them in any way. So motivation is super important, and we talk about motivation a lot. And Zoltan Dernier talks about in the way we understand motivation happen, talks about 3 stages, talks about 3 different phases. So the first one is what he calls the social psychological, and that is the idea of integrative versus instrumental motivation. The integrative motivation, so let's begin with instrumental, which is the easy one. Instrumental is I am motivated to do something because it is useful, because I wanted to do something. I want English to get a better job. Integrative motivation is the motivation that we have that is driven by our desire to join a group. So I want to be one of the cool people who speak cool English or who speak a cool language. So I want to join something that I associate with that. So my motivation to do it is not because I want to get something done, but because I want to become something. In the 90s, the conversation around motivation shifted, and it became about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is if there is something internal, if there is a reason I want to do it, if there is something about me that I am going to feel more fulfilled, more satisfied, that there is something that I want to achieve personally. And extrinsic motivation is like the stick and the carrot. I am motivated because I'm going to get a reward, because I'm going to get a better job, because I'm going to have more opportunities. And then Zoltan Dernier actually talks about a third model that he developed in the year 2000 or after 2001, which he calls the L2 motivational self system. Sounds super cool, right? Almost like a technology thing. So what is this motivational self system? Dernier talks about motivation as being an articulation of 3 possible selves, 3 different selves, 3 different identities or versions of ourselves. So what are they? Number 1 is the ideal L2 self. So I want to become a person who speaks English. And so one of the things that motivates me, one of the factors in my motivation is this, that I want to become something that I associate with speaking English. Maybe somebody who has a good job, maybe somebody who is globally connected, maybe somebody who has an international attitude, somebody who is cool, somebody who can study in another country, somebody who can do a number of things. I have a vision of what somebody who speaks English is, And I want to become that. And that is one of my motivational factors. Another motivational factor is the second one is what he calls the ought to L2 self. So, what I should be or what I should do to avoid bad results. And this is connected with my learning process. So, the first one is about who I want to become, it's about me, it's about my personal transformation. The second one is about how I see myself or what I see as the behaviors and the attitudes that will get me to that goal. So what I should be or what I should do. I should be a dedicated student. I should do my homework. I should stick with English. I shouldn't abandon after 1 year. I should connect with English outside of a class. I should do this, I should do this, I should do this. I should have this attitude, this other attitude. And that is going to help me get to my goals. So that has a lot to do with the learning about learning or learning to learn. And that is something that we can influence in our learners. Uh, the third one has even more to do with us teachers, because the third one is my learning experience, my learning environment, my learning, how I feel when I'm studying English. Am I in a classroom where where I feel comfortable, where I feel safe? Do I have a good relationship with my mates? Do I have a good relationship with my teacher? In the classroom, am I given activities that challenge me, that I find interesting, or is it something I find boring and it's more of a pain? So the things what I want to become is one of these driving ideas. What I need to do to get there is the second factor, and the third factor is am I enjoying the ride? Am I in an environment, in a learning environment where I feel comfortable, where I feel I can be successful? Zoltan says, so in terms of practical motivational strategies, Zoltan Dernier, when he talks about this model, he puts a lot of emphasis on how to reinforce these three selves and how to visualize success and how to build the future vision. So the learner's future vision, the individual learning experience, and the group experience are like three of the dimensions that he highlights. So in terms of the learner's future vision, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you are really interested in that, I will be fascinated to do a second session where we can take a really deep dive into this. So he talks about increasing the capacity of future self-guides to motivate action. So what we want to do is to always remind our students of what they want to become and what is the reason they are doing that. What are the changes that they want for their lives with English? Then he talks about, in terms of building that vision and using that vision of themselves as users of English, people who speak English. He talks about 6 stages in the lifetime of a vision. First, we have to create it. Once that vision is created and they associate things with it, we have to strengthen that. And then we have to substantiate it. We have to make it true. We have to make that happen. We have to give them a plan that will get them there. Then we have to transform that plan into action. Yes, this is who you want to be. This is this is a strategy that you can follow to get there. Now let's make that happen. Come to class, do your homework, study, do this, do that. Then we have to keep that alive over time. And then we have to counterbalance any kind of negative factors that can come there, or we have to look at how that evolves over time. In terms of the individual learning experience, curiosity is something that Dernier puts a lot of emphasis on, that nothing motivates more than keeping the fire of curiosity alive. Actually, that is motivation. So how can we arise, increase, and maintain curiosity? How can we increase the self-confidence of our learners so that they feel that they can be successful, that they have what it takes? And then how do we offer grades and things like grades in a motivational manner? And in terms of the group experience, working with group cohesiveness, working with group norms, creating a learning environment that is organized where people can feel safe. Yes, it builds good classroom atmosphere. It makes for a classroom that is easier to manage. It has all kinds of great things to it. But one of the great things to it is that it is a motivational factor. You want to study in a place, in an environment where you feel comfortable. Dernier says, where there is a vision, there is a way. This idea of the motivational self system is built by visions, and he puts a lot of focus on building and sustaining visions of each of these ideas. But there is something that goes beyond motivation, and Dernier is going to be a part of that, and that is the concept of engagement. And to talk about engagement, I'm going to bring back Zoltan, but I'm going to bring back another friend, Sarah. And Sarah is Sarah Mercer. Zoltan and Sarah Mercer published in the year 2020 this book, Engaging Language Learners in Contemporary Classrooms. And if you are interested in this topic of motivation or engagement, I suggest that this is the first book that you look for. It's a fascinating read. It presents the topic from lots of different angles. It is full of very, very practical ideas and great questions for us to reflect on our contexts. And it is also great because it takes to the next level. It doesn't say motivating language learners, it says engaging. So what is engagement? Engagement, they say, is active participation and involvement in learning activities. What is that? How is that different from motivation? Engagement is about active participation. It is not about going through the motions. It's not that I am in class and I come and I do the exercise that you tell me to do. It means that I am present. I am in class and I am present. I am focused. I am 100% of me, of my attention, of my effort, of my intention is in the class. I am actively participating in it. How many times do you see students who are in the classroom, but they're somewhere else? It is not about compliance. It's not that I do what my teacher tells me to do. It's that I actively connect with it. It's not about being busy. It's not that I am looking at the wall, so I am not engaged. It's not about the act of having something in my hands. It's about what is happening here. It has affective, cognitive, and behavioral components. There are things I do when I feel engaged. I am very active. There are things I know. All of the things I know are being applied, and I am actively acquiring new ideas and making them play with the things I know. And there are things I feel pumped up. Engagement is not motivation. What they say, what Zoltan Dernier, Sarah Mercer say is, no method of language teaching can deliver results without ensuring that students are actively engaged in the process. So you can learn language in a lot of ways, but you cannot learn language if you are not focused in the process, if you are not actively participating in it. It's not about having a book in your hands. And it's not about your eyes being on the page. It's about your brain, your mind, your focus being on that page. That is engagement. Motivation, they say, is undoubtedly necessary for preparing the deal. Motivation is the thing that is going to bring you to class. Engagement is indispensable for sealing the deal. So motivation is going to bring you to class. Engagement is going to make you learn. And it's a big, big, big difference. Motivation is the thing that makes you come back, but engagement is the thing that makes learning happen, because we do not learn for our students. I heard this amazing phrase from Pilar, a friend teacher from Argentina, who says, I can teach you, but I cannot learn you. I can teach you something, but I cannot learn it for you. So we're going to come back to this a little bit later, but the idea is that you only learn when you are engaged. That is the thing that makes learning happen, and that actually goes beyond motivation. And engagement, according to a model that is called self-determination theory that Mercer and Dernier explain in detail in their book, comes when three things come together, happens when three things come together. The first thing that we need to have is autonomy. Autonomy is our default setting. We want to be autonomous. We need to feel that we can direct the things we do. We are not engaged, we are not motivated to do something when we feel that it's an obligation. When the only thing that we connect with that is, I have to do it, I must do it. And we can be autonomous over task, what we do, time, when we do it, team, who we do it with, and technique, how we do it. And we talk about learner autonomy a lot, so I'm not going to go there. Let's focus on the next one. The next one is relatedness. We need to belong. We want to feel like we are connecting to something, or that we are actually connecting to other people. And this brings us back to the integrative motivation. The idea of the fact that we can be motivated, or the ideal L2 self. So it's not just about who I want to become, it's who I want to become a part of, who I want to be one of. So the ideas of English as connecting us to other people, other information, other cultures, other people my age, other people who share my interests, connecting me to more learning, connecting me to other identities. And we're going to come back to this idea of other identities, and we're going to focus on that next, is a powerful factor of engagement. And the third one, any guesses? If you have any, put it in the chat box. The third one is connected with mastery. So mastery is the feeling of becoming better at something that matters to you, something that is important to you, and you feel that you are actually improving, that you are becoming more competent. So mastery is, first of all, a mindset. You've probably heard of Carol Dweck and the idea of growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets. We are not going to talk about that today, but if that sounds interesting, just write that down and Google that immediately after we finish this session. Carol Dweck and mindsets. If you have never heard of it, make sure that you do. So mastery is a mindset. To become better at something, I need to have an attitude that I want to, and an attitude that gives me the confidence to feel that if I practice this, I will get better, that I have what it takes. It's a mindset in terms of I have the focus, I have the drive to do things. It is also a pain. Mastery is a pain because it takes effort. And it's an asymptote. So when we begin learning, we learn really fast, and then we learn less and less, and less and less, and less and less. And when we are really advanced at English, football, or anything else, we practice a lot, we do a lot of things, but we don't get better as quickly as we did when we were beginning. So engagement is when we feel autonomous, we feel related to something, or that we are becoming related with something, and at the same time the activities that we do give us a good sense of becoming better and of feeling challenged, of feeling that we are working at our top capacity, sort of not too much, not too little, just the right amount of effort, but a real effort that is making us become really better. But there are elements about language learning that I want to bring to your attention that go beyond engagement, because motivation and even engagement are things that we talk about in language learning and in learning English a lot. But the next thing I want to introduce you to is not a conversation that we English teachers have very often, or not one that I have seen happen as much. So far so good, but we're going to need two things. We're going to need to look closer into the learner, and we are going to need to look wider into the context of why English. So to talk about looking closer into the learner, I would like you to meet a new friend, Claire Cramsh. Claire Cramsh, if I have to recommend one of her books for the ideas that I will be mentioning that I will be mentioning right now, most of these ideas come from the book that I'm showing you here, The Multilingual Subject. It is not exactly bedtime reading. I confess, I read it. A friend gave me the book, and I read it I didn't understand what it was even about. And it began to make sense gradually, literally over years. I read it for the first time in 2020. It was one of the first things I did in the pandemic, uh, because it was a book I had at home and suddenly I had time in my hands. Uh, and I was scratching my head a lot. And it began making sense like a couple of years later. And every time I read it now, I begin to like peel the layers of it. So give it time, stick with it. It's super worth it. And here are some things that she says. While teachers are busy teaching our learners to communicate accurately, fluently, and appropriately in English, in our case, students are inventing for themselves other ways of being in their bodies and their imaginations. So we are focused on fluency, accuracy, appropriateness, communicative competence. But what learners are really doing is not learning these techniques or learning these things. They are actually inventing other ways of being. They are inventing new selves. They are becoming others. She talks about bodies, of being in your body, being in your imagination, as literally when we are learning a language, we are transforming into someone else. There are things that we associate with that language and who we are going to be, the L2 self. And we are becoming that person. We are building that vision and we are transforming into that vision. So that is much more powerful than learning the present perfect. See, and here I absolutely love this quote from the multilingual subject. Seduced by the foreign sounds, the rhythms and the meanings, and by the coolness of the language as it is spoken by native speakers, most adolescents strive to enter new exotic worlds where they can be, or at least pretend to be, someone else, where they too can become cool and inhabit their bodies in more powerful ways. I can so connect to that. I can so connect. I remember myself. I have the feeling in my body when I was a teenager and when I was like in the first steps of my language learning, of the things that I associated with English, with speaking English, and how when I spoke a phrase, when I sang the lyrics to a song, when I repeated a cool line that I read in a film, or I see it now with my son who repeats memes from the internet all the time. And when he says the memes in English, the lines in English, he has this look like he feels cooler, he feels more empowered. When I was speaking English, or when I started using English phrases, I barely spoke English, but that gave me a sense of power, a sense of seduction, a sense of being engaged at that level. And I am super, I mean, I feel it in my bones that being successful in a language has to do, or being successful as a language learner has to be with, has everything to do with being seduced by that, being somehow your desire has to connect with that. And I would like to introduce you to another friend I said I would introduce you to. This is Ofelia Garcia. Ofelia Garcia, as you can see, her most famous work here is one of the mothers or one of the parents of translanguaging, of the idea of translanguaging. We are not going to go deep into the idea of translanguaging. I know there are many people in Brazil who are super engaged with it. So I've been to Disal and I've seen a number of sessions exploring this approach to languages in great detail. So I'm not going to even try to explain it today. But she says this: to learn a new way of languaging, let's say a new way of communicating, to learn a new way of languaging is not just to learn a new code. It's not just to learn new words and new grammar. It is to enter another history of interactions and cultural practices and to learn a new way of being in the world. So there is, so we have been talking about with Claire Cramsh. Claire Cramsh talks about like the individual idea, the fact that who I want to become, how I feel. Ofelia here is reminding us that there is a history of interactions, that there is a history of a language, of things we associate. Some of them positive, some of them negative, and there are cultural practices that come with it, ways of being in the world. And learning a language is not about I am learning this list of words. learning a language is about I am being in the world in that way, or I want to have that as one of my capabilities for being in the world, one of the ways in which I am in the world. And here is another friend who was also on my list. This is a guy called Leo van Leer. Leo van Leer is, if well, he's another one of my heroes. He's a big hero of Scott Thornbury. So next time he does a session for Brazilian audiences, ask him about Leo van Leer. He will love you for it. But anyway, he said learning a second language, learning an L2, involves a struggle to forge a new identity that is true to the self. So to forge a new identity, to become someone else, or to become another version of you. And here we see a tension, because this new identity has a lot of things that come from English. So English is international, English is global, the language of business, the language of Instagram, the language of TikTok, the language of this, the language of that. English is all of these associations. How can I become that and still be true to myself? This is a tension that language learners at some moment have to face. The fact that it's a way of being in the world, of connecting to others. But in that, we have to find a way, we have to negotiate a new identity that is all of the things that we want to become, but that is still the things we were in the past. And a side note, one of the ways in which this struggle becomes more real is literally in the way we talk. It's literally in our accents. What is an accent when we speak another language? An accent is the way your life history, your own biography, your life until now, the languages you speak, the places you come from, it is the way it shows in the way you speak. So it has everything to do with identity. When I speak English, well, okay, I work very hard on my accent because I speak English because I am a teacher. And because I am a teacher, I think that one of my roles in the classroom is to be a model for English phonology. So I work very hard on things like accent reduction. Uh, then, but then for other people, but for my students, for people who are not teachers, for people who are not English professionals, and for people who are teachers but don't feel the same way about accent as I do. Accent is who I am. Accent is my calling card. So it is my way of being part of English while being true to in my case, my Argentino self. If I speak English in a certain way, or when I speak Spanish, other Spanish speakers can know within 10 seconds or within 1 minute, they know for sure that I am from Argentina. I have been to Brazil and I have been in many conversations, especially with my good friend Alberto, who is a proud citizen of Recife. And all of the Nordestinos I've met, two things have happened. They are super proud of being Nordestinos. They want the whole world to know. And also, people from the south of Brazil, they always mention, oh, your Nordestino accent. I have been in that conversation a number of times. But so when we are speaking our own languages, we are still negotiating this idea of my language is a national language, but my identity is Argentino or Nordestino. And that shows in the way we speak, and that we want that to show. And sometimes we don't. Sometimes when we learn other languages and we want to leave behind that thing that we were, or we go to university, we go from Argentina and I go to study in Colombia, and suddenly I become a Colombian engineer. And I want to sound like a Colombian because I don't want people to identify me with Argentina. I want people to identify me with Colombian engineering. So all of these things play a role in our language learning processes, and we do not always pay attention to that with our learners. There is a divide. So Zoltan Dernier and Sarah Mercer they mention in their book about engagement that there is a divide between two things. The English of free time activities as a lingua emotiva, they say, and the English encountered in school as a lingua academica and a lingua franca. So English is connected to our learners, to their emotions, to things they do in their lives, things they love. But then that is not the English that they see in school. And that is a clash. The idea of the English as an academic language, as a lingua franca, as a language of culture that is not their culture, that is not their emotions. Why can't it be one? Claire Cramsh says that we tend to keep students' attentions by appealing to their pride through praise and rewards. I'm going to make you feel good if you do what I tell you to do. Through their interest, a very new or relevant syllabus, or their fear through threats and through guilt trips. Those are like the traditional strings that we teachers pull. Too often, we forget to appeal to their pleasure. What about English as a lingua emotiva, English as a language of emotions, of feelings, of pleasure and desire? Language teaching and yes, pleasure. This amazing quote I'm going to show you next comes from one of the very last paragraphs in language and in the multilingual subject, the book by Claire Cramsh I was recommending earlier. We have our own reasons for having desired the language strongly enough to go on teaching it for many years. So I'm sure that for those of us here who have been teaching English for a long time, we have our own personal reasons, and they are super strong and very deep for desiring the language, to go to sticking with it. I told you before, I have been studying English for more than 40 years. I cannot think of many other things that I have done for more than 40 years in my life. The pressure to be professionals, to be professional language teachers, often makes us forget that we too are vulnerable to pleasure, to sadness, to disappointment. Well, we talk about disappointment in the staff room a lot, but the fact that we and our relationship with language is also vulnerable to this. What do we like or hate in the language that we teach? What did we project into it? What were we trying to escape when we first learned it? What were the things that took us there? Do we share that with our students? Can we see sparks of that in the classroom, in the things that our students are going through? Do we connect to those? Is that something we allow into the classroom, our emotions and their emotions as well? Are we creating classrooms where the pleasure of English can develop? It's not all about you. And here I'm bringing in another friend, Bonnie Norton. She's from Canada. And she talks about what she says is that language is not only a linguistic system of words and sentences, but it's also a social practice. It's a reminder that language happens in a culture. Language happens always in contexts. Motivation and engagement are individual. They are self-centered. Basically, it's about each of us. Yes, each of us and the things we associate with, blah, blah, blah. But basically, the center of that, the focus on that is in our identity inside here. But language is a social phenomenon. So to answer the why, Bonnie Norton says, we need to go beyond that. Why do we want to study English? Why English? The answer to why, a lot of that is going to be within us, but some of that is going to be beyond us. And she talks about the idea of investment. She replaces the idea of motivation, or she says that motivation and engagement are counterbalanced by what she calls investment. And investment is a question of what is the payoff? What am I going to get out of this? She says that, so a learner's commitment, what is investment? Investment is a learner's commitment to learn a language given their hopes for the future and their imagined identities. So I have hopes, I have expectations, and I have things I want to become. So I am committed to learning a language because if I put in the time and the effort, I am going to get those things. I am investing time and effort to get those things. Learners invest if they anticipate acquiring symbolic and material resources. For those of you who are into sociology or who have ever heard of a guy called Michel Bourdieu, she's talking about the ideas of cultural capital, symbolic capital that Bourdieu talks about. So we want to get symbolic and material resources. Material resources, better jobs. Symbolic resources, more status. That will increase their cultural capital and social power, but also our real, actual capital. If we do not register how learners imagine their language communities and their language identities, we cannot construct learning activities in which learners can invest. So, if learners are a business class university, and we do a course that has a focus on literature and pleasure and language, uh, and the pleasure of language and the culture and all of that. That is not something that they necessarily connect with the reason they are learning that. That is not the reason they are investing. They're investing their time and effort because they want the actual capital, the actual capabilities. However, if we have teenagers who are all the time on social media, who are connected with rock and rap and counterculture and Hollywood and all of that, and we give them a course that is about business English, that is not their idea of the language communities and the language identity they want to build. They want to become the next TikTok star. Business English is not a reason for them to invest their time. So if we do not register the reason they are investing their time, the gains that they want, they expect at the end of a process, not physical gains, but the symbolic gains and the metaphorical gains and the identity gains, and yes, of course, the material gains, we are going to miss on the reason they're here and what we can give them. If we see if we see this problem through the lens of engagement, or if we look at this through the lens of Dernier, Mercer, and engagement, they talk about promoting integrative values and raising awareness of instrumental values, going back to this idea of integrative versus instrumental motivation. So, to promote integrative values, we want to include sociocultural components in our language curriculum. We want to quote positive views about language learning, not the language that we are learning, but the fact of becoming plurilingual or multilingual. We want to encourage self-exploration of the L2 community. We want to get our students to engage on their own with English. We want to promote contact with speakers of English and with cultural products in English. Not like, yeah, we want them to read Shakespeare, but cultural products and speakers in the real contemporary sense, or even in the historical sense, why not? But not as the exclusive thing. And to talk about the instrumental values, like the other side of the coin, which we should never forget about, nothing wrong with it. We want to remind students that mastery of the language leads to accomplishing valued goals. We want to reiterate the role of English in the world for themselves, for the community. We want to encourage the use of English in real life situations to make it a language of doing, not just a language of the school. And finally, because I'm aware that we are running a little bit over time, so I'm going to wrap this up as quickly as I can. I promise it's going to be another 5-10 minutes. How do other languages do it, and what can we learn from the way other languages do it? English is the lingua franca. It must be taught in schools. It is expected by society. So why should we worry? Why are we even talking about the motivation to learn English if basically everybody has to learn English? It's part of the curriculum in schools. You don't finish school unless you study English. You don't get a job until you study English. We don't need to convince people to study English, right? The world is doing our convincing for us. What is not to love in a default language? And here I'm going to go back to my good friend Zoltan Dernier, but with something else. He wrote a fascinating paper and he published it in the year 2017 called The Motivational Foundation of Learning Languages Other Than Global English. So he was looking at how the motivations to learn other languages are different from the motivation to learn English and how it works. And he says, well, him and Al-Huri, who is the other author of this paper, they say, when global English rose, people tended to take up the study of English increasingly as a self-evident part of education rather than as driven by an L2 specific motivational decision. So when global English became a thing, and it grew and grew and grew, then you study English not because you want to study English, but because it's a part of your education. I mean, there is no other way. It's there. You don't have to choose it. You don't have to want it. You don't even have to like it. Unlike the default-like nature of the universal desire to master English, a high level of LOTE. LOTE is languages other than English. So a high level of the other languages in the world, a high level of proficiency in other languages is normally associated with very specific and personalized reasons on the part of the learner. And in their paper, Dernier talks about specific kinds of language learners who are very deeply connected, heritage learners. So if my family comes from Japan, then I want to study Japanese because it's the language of my family, of my grandparents, the language of my ancestors. Or they talk about even religious languages. I'm Jewish. For Jewish people, learning Hebrew is not about learning a language. Jewish people learn Hebrew because it's the language of our religion, it's the language of our sacred texts, it is the language of our culture and the language of who we are. For a Jewish person, for some Jewish people, learning Hebrew is one of the things that make them Jewish. By the way, I don't speak Hebrew, but I do connect with the culture and the identity of that. So for cases like that, languages of heritage, languages of tradition, languages that are connected with things I love. How many people are learning Japanese how many young people are learning Japanese because they are fans of manga and anime and Japanese culture in general? They became fascinated by some aspects of Japanese culture or Korean culture, and then they started to learn the language. There has been a boom in that. So that doesn't happen for English, because for English, it's the default language. So what changes? What does that mean? Wrapping up, when Zoltan met Claire, I would like to wrap up with two ideas, one from Zoltan Dernier, one from Claire Cramsch. Zoltan says, a fruitful avenue for motivating learners of languages other than English is to give them the opportunity to construct their narrative identity in a way that buttresses, that reinforces their unique language learning enterprise. So something that keeps other learners, something that gives learners of French, Russian, Hebrew, other languages, Chinese, whatever, Spanish, is building their identity and making that identity grow. And that's a way of motivating that, of reminding them why they chose their unique language learning enterprise. Are we doing that with English, or have we given up on that with English? And finally, something that Claire Cramsch says. The language learning experience is neither successful nor unsuccessful. It can be lived more or less meaningfully, and it can be more or less transformative. So learning a language is not about meeting certain goals, or is not just the personal part of that, is not about ticking certain boxes. It's not successful or unsuccessful. You do it, meaning it has meaning for you, or it doesn't. It transforms you, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't transform you, if it doesn't have meaning to you, or if it doesn't have a lot of meaning to you, then it is not going to be something you embrace. So what is your homework? There are questions that I'm leaving you with. If learning is a journey, and we talk about learning as a journey, why is the reason that you are not home right now? So if learning is a journey, learning of anything, why is the reason you are not sitting in your chair? So my homework for you, and this is the last thing I tell you before going into questions that you may have, are these questions. First is these three tasks. Number one, reconnect with your why. What's the last time you have thought about what English means to you, about why you wanted to study English. I know that when I started studying English, for me, it was definitely the language of school. My mom literally had to drag me to a language school. She reminds me of that every single day of my life. She had to drag me to study English. I really didn't want to do it. And then I found things that connected me. I found reasons why, and then others, and it became my life. So when was the last time that you so let us, each of us, reconnect with our why. Let us reflect on our learners why. Why are they doing that? Why are they here? Let's ask them. Let's think about the things they bring, the clothes they're wearing, the music they're singing, the memes they're repeating. What is their why? What is it that they are after or that they can be after? And finally, let us help them see their why. They are not always going to see it by themselves. Let us help them identify it. So these are your homeworks, if you like. These are the ideas or the things that I want to leave you with. Uh, and these are the last things I want to share with you. So Alberto, I don't know if there are any questions that I've been ignoring in the past 45 minutes of my crazy monologue.
Well, Pablo, thank you very much for this really insightful talk. There are questions here that I have. Maybe you might need to reply to some of the questions afterwards, but I have an interesting one which came from Marcelo. He asked about the 6 stages of the learner's future visions. His
Mhm.
question is, do the stages relate to the Bloom's taxonomy? And if so, how?
They do and they don't. This is something, if for those of you who are interested in that, uh, uh, of course, there is the book that I mentioned by Dernier and Mercer, and there are 2 other books that you may be interested in by Zoltan Dernier. One is called Motivational Strategies in the Language Classroom, and another is called Motivating Learners, Motivating Teachers. And I recommend those because those are like practical books. It's not that he's going into the theory. And actually, the steps were taken from those books, from Motivating
Mhm.
Learners, Motivating Teachers. And in the book, he talks about these stages and he mentions specific tasks or things you can do in the classroom to develop that. So for those of you who are interested in that, definitely go into the books. You will find a lot more. Or Google that.
Okay.
Mm,
Arthur has
it
a
is connected
question.
with Bloom's taxonomy in the sense that, but it is more of a sort of the biography of a vision. It is more about the first thing you need is to build, to create that thing you want to become. The next thing you want to do is to make it stronger, to give it more definition, to give it more meaning. And then you want to define a strategy to get there. So it's more about the steps there. In terms of Bloom's taxonomy, all of this is very meta. I mean,
Mhm.
all of this is very high level. Not high level in the sense that it's better, because Bloom's taxonomy doesn't mean that high order thinking skills are the good ones and the lower order are for the bad students. But what it means is that these are all like, it's more on the learning to learn or managing your own learning uh,
Mhm.
phase. It's not necessarily engaging with things like remembering or analyzing or comparing and connecting, sort of those levels of Bloom. Um, but this is and the idea behind this is that if you build that vision, it's going to be like a magnet, and that magnet is going to attract your action. It's going to be like another engine that is making you move.
Mhm.
So I don't know that it works at the same place as Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah. Well, I would like to just recap on a quote that you brought, by Claire Kramish, when she says that while teachers are busy teaching students to communicate accurately, fluently, and appropriately, students are inventing for themselves other ways of being their bodies and their imaginations. Well, I would like to think about myself as a learner because I chose to go to a language school as a teenager. I was learning English, but still, while doing that, I was imagining myself as a world traveler using English naturally, which I could start doing at the age of 26. So, I mean, that was my way of reconnecting with my why. Well, maybe we can send you the questions for you to reply afterwards. I'm going to talk to Disal about this. Pablo, I want to thank you ever so much for such an enlightening talk. I think this was a very, very nice way to wrap up, the school year in Brazil, which will be happening very soon. And I'm sure there will be views of this talk in Disal's, channels, Facebook and YouTube, etc. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you everyone for attending this session, for your participation. We'll try and find a way to get Pablo to answer some of your questions. And thank you once again, Disal, for giving us the space to talk about why the theme of the talk today. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you, and thank you everyone at Disal and every single one of you for being here. It's been a blast.